The Southern Railway Schools class of locomotives were designed to be used on lines which were unsuitable for larger locomotives but still being capable of pulling reasonably heavy trains. Join me in this video as I build and review the Dapol 00 gauge plastic model kit of this small but powerful locomotive. Hello and welcome to Model Minutes. This video is a build and review of the Dapol Schools class locomotive in 00 gauge. Before we start the kit, as always, remember that adult supervision may be required due to the use of sharp tools and toxic paints and chemicals. Dapol recommends this kit for those aged 10 years old and over. So let's take a look at the kit. As is standard with many of the Dapol kits, it comes in a plastic bag with a cardboard header. I do have my concerns with this kind of packaging, as there is nothing to prevent the parts from becoming damaged or lost if a tear is made in the bag. Mine seems to be complete, however, and as you can see, there are a large number of parts to this kit, around 50 I think. Many of the parts do suffer from flash and some are warped, and I'll have to deal with these issues as I progress through the build. A small sheet of waterslide decals are included, and it's not mentioned in the instructions, but there are actually two decal options. Both of them depict the school class locomotive named after Harrow School, but one version is for its original Southern Railway livery and the other is for its later use as part of British Railways. They seem well printed but a little yellowed. The instructions consist of a single A4 printed page. There is a tiny colour picture of the finished model in Southern livery, a number of exploded diagrams which are difficult to read, and 45 numbered stages to the construction which are difficult to understand at the best of times. As I progress through this build, I'll follow them as best as I can, but initiative will have to be used at times. So, as with many of the kits I build, the first step was to give it a quick wash in warm soapy water. This is to help remove any grease or dirt that might be left over from the moulding process and help give a better surface for the cement and paint to stick to. The side frames were then cut from the sprues using a sharp knife, and any flash or burrs were cleaned up using a nail file or by trimming with a knife. These parts were then cemented together. As you can see, I've upgraded my cement. I'm now using Tamiya extra thin poly cement as it helps flow into the joints better. I then decided to paint these side frames with Humbrol 33 matte black. But it took an absolute age, and as there are other black parts on this kit, I instead decided to spray the components with a matte black aerosol. This layer of paint would also help as a primer for when I came to use acrylics for the final coat. When the paint had cured, the next stage was to add the wheels to the chassis. The wheels in this kit all need joining together at the axles. The original design of this kit had the intention of the wheels and valve gear being able to move, and the model could be pushed around a 00 gauge layout by another powered model or a wagon with a motor in it. I have, from my experiences with the previous two Dapol kits I've built, got absolutely no faith in being able to get this to move freely by the end of the build. Purely based on the age and poor quality of the parts and the higher than normal number of moving parts the complicated valve gear has on this locomotive, any warped or accidentally glued parts will prevent this from occurring. Construction of the wheels and valve gear is probably the most frustrating part of this kit, which is not helped by the instructions being cryptic and unclear. Having struggled through and managed to correctly attach the valve gear on one side, it can then be repeated on the other. With the main chassis complete, the next step was to build the front bogie. This is the smaller set of unpowered wheels at the front of the locomotive that helps spread the weight and guide the locomotive along the track. Again, if assembled correctly, the bogie should be able to swivel freely and the wheels turn. Having completed the chassis, I then moved on to the main body of the locomotive. The two halves of the boiler can be cemented together, and they actually fit surprisingly well. The smoke box door can then be added, and the whole assembly cemented to the footplate part. The cab of the locomotive can then be added to the assembly, and again this went together quite well. The finer details can then be added, such as the pipework. This did suffer from a considerable amount of flash and it had to be removed. The smoke deflectors can then be added to the front of the locomotive. I had to ensure I removed enough paint on these parts to get a good bond for the cement. The buffer beam needed a little cleaning up in order to get it to fit. There are a number of smaller details, such as more pipework, the reversing rod, and the nameplates which need attaching to the body of the locomotive. The nameplates do have the word Harrow moulded onto them, but as I was going to use the decals, I sanded them off. With all the smaller details added, the chassis can then be cemented onto the body. It does fit with a little bit of persuasion. To finish off the construction of the main part of the loco, all I needed to do was to attach the footsteps to the front and rear, and then add the coupling bar for the coal tender. Moving on to the tender of the locomotive, it's much more simple to construct. It's effectively a box on wheels. So whilst you watch me finish up the construction, I'll tell you a little about the actual school's locomotives. Designed by Richard Maunsell in the late 1920s for the Southern Railway, the school's class was so named as each locomotive was given the name of a public school in the UK. Maunsell used elements of his previous larger locomotives and incorporated them into the design of the school's class. This resulted in a very powerful engine for its size, and as a result is the most powerful 440 locomotive ever built in Europe. The benefit of such a small but powerful engine was that it could be used on more restrictive railway lines which featured sharper curves, smaller loading gauges and shorter turntables, while still being able to fulfill duties on the main lines as well. In 1948, following the nationalisation of the railways, the locomotives became a part of British Railways, and the liveries were gradually changed from the bright malachite green of the Southern Railway to the darker green of British Rail. By 1962, however, the school's class was withdrawn from service, and only 3 of the 40 locomotives of the class were saved for preservation, the majority being scrapped. Having completed the majority of the build with only a few fine details to add at the end, I then start painting the main body and tender a relevant green colour. I'm using Humbrol's Rail Colour Acrylic number 410. I quite like the flow quality and finish of this paint. I do thin it with water to try and avoid leaving any brushstrokes on the model, so as a result a few coats will be required. Any black areas of the model, such as the smoke box or cab, I'm just leaving in the previously sprayed condition. That being said, some areas will require a little touching up with Humbrol 33 Matte Black. I painted the valve gear, connecting rods and rims of the wheels with Humbrol 53 Metallic Grey. I used Humbrol Enamel 153 Matte Red to highlight the lining on the model. Using a very fine paintbrush and the paint straight out of the pot, only one coat was required for this, and I'm quite pleased with the results. Time and patience is required here. I used Humbrol Metallic Enamel 54 Brass to pick out all the relevant pipework that required it, and the whistles on top of the boiler. Most of the colours I'm using are based on my quick research into an appropriate livery for a model in British Railways use. I'm sure the more experienced railway modeller out there will point out the errors I may inadvertently make, but I'm quite pleased with the choices I have made. The buffer beams were picked out in red, again using Humbrol 153. Following this, a small amount of satin varnish, Humbrol 135 acrylic, was used as a base for the decals. I only applied it in the areas the decals were to be used. The relevant decals were then cut from the sheet, soaked in warm water, and with the help of Humbrol Decal Fix, added to the model. For more information on how to apply decals, I made a video on this topic, so have a look for it on my channel. When the decals were in position, a further coat of Decal Fix was applied to help them settle into the surface of the model and appear painted on. Whilst the decals were curing, I then added the final details, which consisted of the buffers, pipes, hoses and couplings on the buffer beams. The final step was to apply a further coat of satin varnish number 135 to the model. I thinned the varnish with water to avoid leaving brush strokes and only painted the green areas of the kit. This was to avoid having to paint the black parts again with a matte varnish, as they should, I feel, have different finishes. And here is the finished model. So, I'm in two minds about this kit. I love it because I think the finished kit looks great and I did have fun building it as it presented a bit of a challenge. On the other hand, however, I hate this kit because it is quite a bit of a challenge, but it's severely let down by the poor packaging and the next to useless instructions. I feel as though Dapol haven't done anything to help or improve the instructions since the kit was first manufactured. The model first appeared in 1959 from Kitmaster. It then changed hands to Airfix in 1968 and then again to Dapol in the 1980s. The only recent addition to the kit is the newer version of the decals, but even then you can see in the images that the name of the locomotive doesn't quite fit onto the name board. Also, the instructions do mention at times that the wheel should turn freely, but I think this is completely unrealistic now and perhaps it's better to just not mention it. The kit retails for around £10 in the United Kingdom, but prices do vary a little depending on where you shop, but £10 seems to be about average. I feel that £10 is expensive, particularly given the packaging and overall quality of the product, especially bearing in mind that I can get a brand new tool Airfix starter set with included paints, brushes and cement for the same price. But that's just my opinion. So, in conclusion, if it wasn't for my previous modelling experience and love of model trains, this kit may well have ended up in pieces on the floor out of frustration. But due to a little perseverance and patience, I feel I've achieved a good looking, finished model. I love the way this kit looks and it will look great on display. As always, let me know what you think of my build, techniques and finished model in the comments below. I'm also keen to hear your suggestions as to other kits that you'd like to see me build on my channel or ideas for new videos, so feel free to post that too. All that's left to say is thanks for watching the video and don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe and click that notification button in order to see more content and help support the channel. And feel free to share this video with your family and friends. Don't forget that you can connect with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. See you all again next time.